Okay, welcome to the Simple channel. Yesterday, several photos were exposed, causing a huge stir. Everyone suddenly realized that the news broken by the US a few months ago might be true. Do we really have a third type of sixth-generation aircraft? This is quite an exciting piece of news. Winston is also very happy and excited. He has been checking information continuously for 24 hours just to tell you what's going on. Well, not exactly 24 hours. That's an exaggeration. It's impossible to do it for 24 hours straight. Anyway, yesterday afternoon, someone left a message on my channel. At first, I didn't take it seriously. They said there was a third party, and I thought they were looking at another fake photo. But later, when I checked Weibo, I found it wasn't a fake, and I felt very excited. At that time, it was hard to confirm, so I asked some people. Although I got some clues, the person who told me about it might have made it up to keep things confidential, so it might not be true. Now, let's simply analyze this newly exposed aircraft based on its photos. This aircraft exposed yesterday, after multiple verifications, shouldn't be a fake photo. Relevant news with photos was also posted on Wozhong. Judging from its appearance, this aircraft looks quite sci-fi. It's a tailless aircraft without vertical stabilizers. What's interesting about the exposed pictures is that the wing angles of the aircraft are different during different flights. We can clearly see that the angles in the leftmost and rightmost pictures are different. Looking at the aircraft from the available views, its landing gear hatches are quite large, and the wheels are also of a certain size. So far, the newly exposed aircraft seems to be between the two previously exposed sixth-generation aircraft, the J-50 and J-36, in terms of volume. It doesn't look like a particularly small aircraft. The person who exposed it told me that this is an unmanned medium-range loyal wingman. Of course, this is possible. Yesterday, I searched a lot of relevant articles on Weibo. There were similar articles before, but since they were patent applications on the National Patent website, many such papers don't get implemented in the end. Many are just for professional title evaluations. So I saw similar articles at that time but didn't pay much attention. Later, when I looked them up, the papers mentioned that this aircraft is a variable sweep wing aircraft, which matches the newly exposed aircraft because its wing angles are different. With variable sweep wings, when the angle is small, the speed is faster. When the angle is large, as shown in the picture where the wings are extended, the range is larger and the endurance is longer. Some people say, is this aircraft just like the US X series, merely an aerodynamic test vehicle? I don't think so. Looking at US history, during its peak in the 1980s, the aerodynamic test vehicles it developed were actually very small, with a single engine layout much smaller in volume than the actual in-service US aircraft. The aircraft exposed this time is clearly a twin-engine one. In our country, if we were to build a test vehicle, single-engine aircraft are available. For medium thrust engines, we can use the WS-13 series, and for large thrust ones, the WS-10 series is sufficient. Moreover, aerodynamic test vehicles don't really need many electronic devices. They're just for aerodynamic verification. So, in my personal opinion, this might really be a new domestic sixth-generation aircraft. And just today, someone left a message on Bilibili judging the scene. They said the photo seems to have been taken near Sichuan University of Electronic Science and Technology, not in Xi'an. It's very likely that the paper was published by Northwestern Polytechnical University, NPU. And it's probable that NPU and Chengdu Aircraft Industry Group, CAC, in Sichuan collaborated on it. But I saw news that NPU is collaborating with Shenyang Aircraft Corporation, SAC, because the aircraft's appearance is similar to SAC's model. However, I don't have to stick to the similar appearance because there are all kinds of leaks online. But someone judged from the images that the aircraft should have flown near Sichuan University of Electronic Science and Technology. Although they look similar, there are significant differences. SAC's J-50 has a lambda wing, where the leading edge sweep angle and trailing edge sweep angle are basically the same or have little difference. The newly exposed sixth-generation aircraft clearly has variable wing angles. According to the paper, it's a variable sweep wing aircraft, not a lambda wing. Also, from the size of the aircraft reported this time, I personally don't think it's an aerodynamic test vehicle. As I just said, for aerodynamic verification, a single engine would be enough. There's no need for a twin engine setup, which would reduce costs. Well, we can basically judge its size. There are too few reference objects in the photos we're looking at now, so it's hard to tell exactly how big it is, and I didn't see it on site. But basically, if it uses at least two WS-13 engines, its size won't be smaller than the IN Service J-35. If it uses WS-10 engines, its size might be comparable to that of the J-20 and J-50. I still want to ask, first of all, a key question. Many people say it might be a medium-range loyal wingman. Is it manned or unmanned? Winston, do you have a definite answer? Well, from the exposed photos, the aircraft is quite large. I asked someone, and they told me it's an unmanned medium-range loyal wingman. But I suspect that because of the confidentiality agreement, they just said something casually. Now, tonight, I won't draw a conclusion about this aircraft. I estimate there are 3 possibilities for it. And this aircraft, as it appears, is relatively large. So it could be manned, unmanned, or as we saw in the military parade village some time ago, we talked about it in a previous episode, the medium-range wingmen there are all very small. In that case, their missions are relatively simple, and current AI is sufficient. But this aircraft is so large, if it's to engage in air combat, you can't remotely control an aircraft in intense air combat unless you're fighting a relatively weak country. The aircraft our country is developing now is a 6th generation one, basically facing our biggest opponent across the ocean. In this case, the aircraft must have quite strong autonomous air combat capabilities. There are 2 possibilities for its current flight. It might be manned first to conduct aerodynamic verification, and then when AI technology advances enough, the crew will be removed. So for now, it's still impossible to determine whether it's an unmanned or manned aircraft because the exposed photos are all taken from below, and the cockpit can't be seen. We'll need to wait for newly exposed photos or videos. That is to say, if it's a wingman, its volume might be too large. Could it be a carrier-based fighter? Let me clarify. I didn't say its volume is too large for a wingman. It's just that its large size doesn't make it look like a disposable drone. Unlike the ones we saw in the military parade village, which are small and disposable, with simple missions scouting ahead, acting as a sensor. This newly exposed aircraft is larger and might have to undertake air combat missions, so it needs to perform many maneuvers in air combat. Current technology might not allow such a large aircraft to engage in medium-range air combat. A few years ago, either last year or the year before, when the US tested its F-16 modified into an unmanned fighter, it could only do close-range dogfights. Also, some time ago, our country exposed a J-16 with a manned front seat and an unmanned rear seat, which was also verifying unmanned bombing. There's no relevant report on whether it's verifying close-range air combat or beyond visual-range air combat, so it's hard to say. So the aircraft that flew this time might be unmanned in the future. But this flight might be manned to first test the aerodynamic shape. When we talked about drones last time, the final plan adopted by the US is mass production with relatively low cost, allowing for the sacrifice of many functions. That is to say, for such drones, since they're not manned, there's no need to consider human life, so they're disposable. According to your analysis and the exposed photos, this aircraft needs to carry out functions and even have combat capabilities, which might make it a bit different from ordinary drones. Of course, we might have more advanced ideas. Well, that's all possible. As I just said, just because current AI doesn't support drones for complex bombing doesn't mean it won't in the future. So it's possible to first fly the aircraft for aerodynamic verification. Many US drones with complex aerodynamic layouts, if they're to be large in the future, also had people on board initially. That's nothing unusual. Let me share my personal judgment. There are 3 possibilities for this aircraft. The first is that it's a medium-range loyal wingman. If it is, its large size is reasonable, because for an air combat medium-range loyal wingman, its size is limited by the missiles it carries. You can't load too many small missiles. You need at least the same generation of air-to-air missiles as those on the current J-20 and future J-50 and J-36. For our country, the smallest medium-range air-to-air missile is about 4 meters long. The exposed drone seems a bit like Russia's Su-57, with engines on both sides, not close together like the J-20 or J-36, so it might have a long central weapons bay. And a basic judgment is that this aircraft should be smaller than the J-36. It's also possible that this aircraft will carry the PL-17 missile internally in the future. If it's a medium-range loyal wingman, its size is limited by the volume of the air-to-air missiles it will carry. Unlike the drones in the military parade village that don't undertake bombing missions and don't need to carry air, to air missiles, which can be made small and short, this aircraft needs to carry a considerable number of air. To air missiles, so it's larger. And as I just said, if it's a medium-range loyal wingman, it can only rely on human control to a certain extent. But in air combat, the battlefield changes, so it needs strong autonomous air combat capabilities. Humans actually only decide whether to let it join the battle or determine the target to attack. Humans don't need to intervene in the entire air combat process. In this case, such a loyal wingman compared to ordinary manned aircraft only simplifies the equipment for the pilot and maintaining the pilot's survival at high altitudes. It still needs all the optoelectronic equipment, radar, and avionics systems that manned aircraft have. So, in my personal opinion, if this is an air combat medium, range-loyal wingman, its size won't be smaller than the J-35. Anything smaller would be meaningless. If we don't consider it being unmanned and assume it's manned, will its positioning overlap with the J-50? Well, this question leads to the second conjecture. Since the country hasn't announced this aircraft yet, the following are all conjectures. The second conjecture is that our country, like the former Soviet Union, used to have competitions among design schemes for aircraft selection, without actual prototype competitions. The US, starting from the 1970s, has adopted prototype competitions for its aircraft. For example, when the US Air Force wants heavy aircraft, it will finally select 2 aircraft, require the production of actual prototypes for competition. For light aircraft, there will also be 2 aircraft competing. Even for US helicopters, until recently, its V-280 tiltrotor was subject to prototype competition. Only recently, because the US really has no money, and probably to take care of Boeing, the F-47 didn't go through prototype competition. Before that, US tactical aircraft all had prototype competitions. Coincidentally, many people on Weibo are digging up information. In the process, they found that during the domestic aerodynamic research on 6th generation aircraft, 8 schemes were proposed, and 4 of them underwent low-altitude verification. This should have been verification with relatively small model-like aircraft, and their aerodynamic layouts are promising. Among these 4 aerodynamic layouts, we have now seen at least 3, the J-50, J-36, and this newly exposed aircraft. The 4th one hasn't been exposed yet. Could it be that the newly exposed aircraft is competing with the J-50, and they're both in the aerodynamic verification stage? In a bidding process, only when the bidding is won will the aircraft of the J-50's tonnage really take shape. Also, from relevant papers, when applying for patents, it was mentioned that this aircraft is a certain type, so I think it's possible that the so-called 4th aircraft is likely a 50-ton class aircraft with a 3 engine scheme developed by SAC, similar in size to the J-36, competing with the J-36. I personally think this possibility exists. There are competitions between different tonnages. The J-50 is about 40 tons. The newly exposed aircraft is also about 40 tons, competing with each other. For the 50-ton class, we've seen the J-36, and it's possible that a 4th aircraft will fly in the future for bidding. Let me show you the previous aircraft bidding cases. For the light fighter in the US 3rd generation, or our 4th generation aircraft, there was a direct competition between the F-16 and F-17, YF-17 back then. The competition between the F-22 and the YF-23 is also widely talked about. There's even an article online called The King of Losers, lamenting that the more advanced aerodynamically designed F-23 was finally eliminated by the F-22. In fact, the US F-35 also went through bidding in the end. The winning F-35 scheme defeated Boeing's cute-toed like YF-32 scheme. So the second possibility is that the aircraft exposed this time is competing with the J-50. Not that we're actually putting it into service. If it's a manned-in service aircraft, it's unlikely to be a 3-engine manned 6th generation aircraft. Well, I still want to ask, as you just said, you found out its aerodynamic shape from the paper, so is this project led by universities or by SAC or CAC? Do you know? So far it's hard to say. After all, people who really know the inside story don't dare to talk about it, and domestic confidentiality regulations are very strict. But it can be basically judged that this aircraft should be manufactured by CAC or SAC, not by universities. Universities don't have the ability or such manufacturers. Universities may have participated in the design. That's possible. I saw US reports exposing that the J-50, which has been exposed many times, uses a lambda wing and twin engines and is manned. The new model has a more concise design with different wing structures, so they think it might be another RD route. Is this judgment reasonable? It should be reasonable, but it's normal for different manufacturers to adopt different schemes when competing for aircraft of the same tonnage. As we just saw, when the F-16 and F-18 YF-17 were bidding for the US lightweight fighter program, one was a twin engine and the other a single engine. Similarly, if the newly exposed 6th generation aircraft has a different aerodynamic layout from the J-50 but is of the same tonnage, it's not strange. Do you think the exposed video this time is its first flight or just a testing phase? If it's testing, when can we expect its first flight? Actually, the currently testing J-36, J-50, and this newly exposed aircraft should all be aerodynamic verification aircraft. In fact, many of their supporting subsystems are still a long way from being ready. Their current state is similar to that of the US YF-22, YF-23, X-35, and X-32 back then. They're still in the aerodynamic verification stage. There's still a long way to go before they enter service. In addition to further refining the aerodynamic layout through test flights, their electronic equipment and corresponding radars are not yet developed and need further work. Just like when our country tested the J-20, it first tested the 2001 prototype, and it wasn't until 2 years later, after aerodynamic verification was successful, that the 2011 prototype, which was closer to the production model, was built. Now, whether it's the newly exposed aircraft or the original J-36 and J-50, they should all be in the X or Y stage similar to US aircraft. They still need 1 to 2 years of aerodynamic verification flights before the prototype is finalized. By the prototype stage, the aerodynamic layout will be very close to that of the in-service aircraft. We can clearly see that there's a significant difference in appearance between the YF-22 and the final in-service F-22. Not to mention the F-35. The original X-35 had a flat surface, while the F-35 we see now is almost full of protrusions. So I estimate that the prototype won't come out until at least 2026 or even 2027. If that's the case, is it an iterative version of the J-50? Or are they completely two different aircraft, even two different types? I personally think there are two possibilities, and there's a third one we'll talk about later. Either it's an unmanned loyal wingman supporting the J-36 and J-50, or if the exposed size is really similar to the J-50, then it shouldn't be an iteration of the J-50, but a competing system scheme with the J-50. If it's competing with the J-50, but the J-50 has already been exposed, does that mean the J-50 is somehow finalized? Otherwise, why would it be exposed? It's just like what the US did back then. When the US was bidding for aircraft, they weren't exposed at the same time, but one after another. If a company was slow in progress, like Northrop's YF-23, which had a more radical aerodynamic layout back then, its test flight was almost a year later than the F-22, and they were in a competitive relationship. So this can't be confirmed, right? No, it can't. Then, what is the positioning of the J-50 developed by SAC? Is it a carrier-based aircraft? Now, looking at the J-50 and J-36, as I talked about in my previous live broadcast, the J-36 seems more like a battlefield commander. Its aircraft is very large, and the position of its wings is more forward than that of the J-50, so its range should be longer than the J-50's, and the aircraft itself is larger. Moreover, the J-36 uses a side-by-side 2 seat configuration, while the J-50 is a single seat 1. So it's possible that our country is still exploring future air combat. The J-36 will mainly act as a battlefield commander, of course, with strong air combat capabilities. The J-50 is more likely a continuation of the J-20, participating in combat like traditional fighters, but with more access to system resources than the J-20. In other words, one is more like an assassin, and the other is more like a general. Then, what role does this newly exposed aircraft play? For this newly exposed one, first, we can't determine its size. In my personal opinion, if it's smaller than the J-50, it's most likely a medium-range wingman. If it's about the same size as the J-50 or even a bit larger, it might be a competitor to the J-50, an assassin-type aircraft for the battlefield. Overall, What kind of thinking or battlefield strategy does our country show in developing sixth-generation aircraft through the 3 exposed sixth-generation aircraft? In fact, for future air combat, according to the plan I saw, around 2035, there will be no need for early warning aircraft. The functions of future early warning aircraft will be distributed to other aircraft, such as drones, the J-36, tankers, the future H-20, and the future J-50. That is, the future will be decentralized. On the battlefield, even if you lose several aircraft, it won't be like current air combat. In current air combat, if the early warning aircraft is shot down, the Air Force with an early warning aircraft can basically massacre the other side. As we mentioned before, the key to future air combat should be decentralization. If we want to achieve decentralization, is developing so many types of aircraft at the same time a waste of manpower or a lack of concentrated resources? Is there such a drawback? I personally don't think so. Because if you want to decentralize, especially distribute the functions of centralized aircraft to other ones, the types of aircraft will naturally increase, which is normal. If the 6th generation aircraft is officially finalized in the future, what kind of mass production scale do you think it will reach? For heavy aircraft like the J-36 with 3 engines, I personally think that if there's no world war and only the current China-US confrontation, a production volume of 200 to 300 will be enough. As for the J-50 and this newly exposed aircraft, since it's not sure whether it's unmanned or manned, let's take the J-50's volume as a reference. About 400 to 600 aircraft of the J-50's size will be enough, and the rest will be drones, that is, medium-range wingmen. Overall, first of all, this matter was first exposed by the US. Do you think the US chose this time to expose it? Or did we decide to expose it first, and then the US military cooperated by taking these photos? First, this matter was exposed domestically first. After the domestic exposure, when we checked Wozhong carefully, all the photos in the reports were domestic ones. Now, domestic confidentiality regulations are very strict. If they didn't want the photos to be posted online, they wouldn't have spread continuously. Even clearer photos were released today, clearer than yesterday. In fact, it should be intentional. As we said earlier, 6th generation aircraft are not just 1 or 2 types. They are a family with many varieties. In this case, we are actually telling the US the progress of our 6th generation aircraft. Compared with the US F-47, which is still on PPT, our progress is much faster. Moreover, if the newly exposed 6th generation aircraft is competing with the J-50, it will put more pressure on the US because the US basically no longer has the ability to conduct prototype competitions. It is basically concentrating all its national efforts on its so-called F-47, and even delayed its Navy's 6th generation aircraft, the FA-20X program, for it. I checked that the earliest talk about China having a third 6th generation aircraft was around January this year, when US satellites released images of China. Of course, the images were very blurry. Then many US media reported it, saying that the US believed China might have a third one, and now it's basically confirmed. Everyone is really surprised to find that China is serious about this. Yes, do you think there will be a 4th one? You just said there were 8 schemes in the bidding and 4 might have entered the verification stage. I personally think there's a high probability that we might see a 4th, 6th generation aircraft fly this year. What kind of idea will the 4th one have? It depends on who developed it. If it's developed by SAC and has a similar size to the J-36, it's likely competing with the J-36. We still need to see how big the 4th one is when it flies, and judge based on its volume. Basically, the larger the aircraft, the more functions it has. The smaller it is, the fewer devices it can carry, and the relatively fewer functions it has. Well, let's see if netizens on YouTube have any questions. They are basically discussing. Does anyone want to ask questions? Let me add one more thing, my third conjecture. The third one is that since we still can't see the size of this aircraft and can't judge it, there's another possibility. It's the JH-26, a fighter bomber that has been rumored domestically in recent years. But if this aircraft, although twin engine, is larger than the J-50, it's very likely a fighter bomber. In fact, the US fighter bomber back then was the FB-111, as shown in the left photo. When it wanted to replace the FB-111 in the 1990s, it developed 2 fighter bombers based on the F-22 and F-23. The maximum takeoff weight of these two fighter bombers exceeded 60 tons, which is heavier than our country's Yun 8 and Yun 9. So, we need to wait and see. It's not impossible that this aircraft will carry anti-ship missiles and long-range ground attack weapons in the future to cooperate with 6th-generation aircraft. But if it's a bomber, bombers are usually larger because they need to carry more weapons. I mean, is a fighter bomber a type of bomber? Moreover, the US FB-23, the fighter bomber modified from the F-23, had a maximum takeoff weight exceeding 80 tons, heavier than our country's H-6. Could it be that this aircraft is actually very large with a not so good thrust to 2 weight ratio but uses a variable sweep wing like the FB-111? As we said, the advantage of variable sweep wings is a longer range. To get a higher speed, you just reduce the wing angle and the speed will increase. Could it be a bomber to replace the H-6 in the future? It's possible. Its appearance is a bit too sci-fi, yes, and it's tailless, right? Right. A tailless design. What characteristics does a tailless design have? Can you explain? A tailless aircraft means it has no vertical stabilizer. The vertical stabilizer of an aircraft mainly provides vertical stability, allowing the aircraft to fly forward normally without yaw. Generally, aircraft don't adopt a tailless design. Tailless aircraft are more prone to yaw, so they need to adjust the flight attitude through differential movement of other control surfaces, which basically requires a strong flight control system. But the advantages of a tailless design are: first, without a vertical stabilizer, the drag is reduced, enabling the aircraft to fly farther. Second, the stealth performance is better. Airliners usually don't use a tailless aerodynamic layout. So do you mean it might be a counterpart to the USB-21? It's possible. We're just talking about possibilities. Yes, it might have supersonic capabilities. Oh, our country wants everything, right? Adults don't make choices. Our RD strength is really strong. We've developed so many new aircraft in such a short time. It's dazzling. What kind of engine do you think this aircraft will use in the future? Now, it depends on its size, as the size of the aircraft determines the size of the engine. If it's the same size as the J-50 and J-36, it will basically use the next generation engine of our country's WS-15 in the future. The engine's model hasn't been announced yet. It's a variable cycle engine. The core of this engine was actually ignited in 2016. There are no photos Bagwang yet, but it was exposed in domestic reports in 2016 in the so-called sugar-coated official articles that its core was ignited in 2016. As we know, our country's engine technology still lags behind that of the US and the UK to this day. If it can't catch up for aircraft of the same size as the J-50 and J-36, if it's smaller than the J-50, it might use the engine on the J-35. That is to say, it's very likely a supersonic aircraft, right? Now, it's definitely supersonic, otherwise it wouldn't adopt a variable sweep wing design. Yes, otherwise, there's no need for a variable sweep wing. Using a variable sweep wing means it wants both range and speed, so it has a variable sweep angle. If it's supersonic, is it a medium, short range, or medium, long range aircraft? Now, our country's response to future battlefields, especially our main opponent across the ocean, in fact, we don't value short range much. The main future battlefield will be between the first and second island chains, the key area of competition between the two sides. So its range should not be less than that of the J-50, and might even be better than the J-50s because of the variable sweep wing, which makes it easier to achieve a longer range. I still want to discuss with you why this aircraft was suddenly exposed 8 months after the exposure of the J-36 and J-50. Does it indicate some of our strategic needs? Or that the relationship between us and the US has become more tense? So we're bringing out another hard dish. Because according to later analysis, the exposure of the J-36 and J-50 was also related to the international situation, with some relatively urgent situations at that time, and we brought out the hard dish for the US to see. Including our launch of intercontinental missiles and intercontinental air defense missiles, I think they all had such purposes. Do you think the strategic or political purpose this time is to deter the US? This possibility exists, including our upcoming September 3rd military parade. Wasn't Trump supposed to come to China? Just like the J-20's first flight was during a US visit. Oh, Trump probably won't come. But it's very likely that they will meet at the G20 summit or other summits like APEC in the second half of the year. There are such trends. But for the September 3rd military parade, Putin will definitely come. Now, US-Russia relations are not good, and Putin recently made a statement that he probably won't come. What would he come for? To steal Putin's spotlight? The focus of the September 3rd military parade should be China, not the US. I think this is media hype. Another possibility is that the US held the Talisman Sabre exercise some time ago, and US military officials have been making reckless remarks recently, including the former UK Defense Secretary, who also made reckless remarks about intervening in the Taiwan Strait. We're showing them our strength, telling them our progress and the gap between us. In this case, for real US military personnel, they will have a good assessment of their own strength. Just like the South China Sea crisis in 2016, we conducted a live fire test of the DF-21, telling the US that we really have anti-ship ballistic missile capabilities, and finally, the US military adventure fizzled out. Also, when Trump was about to step down for the first time, he wanted to provoke a crisis, but was stopped by US Joint Chiefs of Staff Milley. Professional soldiers like him pay more attention to whether they can win, and they are more professional in technology than these politicians. I think we need to observe more information, and I believe more news will come out. Yes, we need to keep an eye on this aircraft. I believe there will be videos of it in the future. Do netizens have any other questions? Everyone is probably still shocked because it's so new. They were already amazed by the original J-36 and J-50, thinking they were invincible, and now a third one comes, which is even more shocking. If there are no more questions, today's live broadcast will end here. Thank you, everyone. This week, I'll try to figure out how to live broadcast on Bilibili. If the problem is solved, I might live broadcast on Bilibili this weekend. Thank you for participating in tonight's live broadcast. Today's live broadcast ends here.